Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Darren Hayes, host of the Pigskin Dispatch and Jersey Dispatch podcast. I hope you've enjoyed another great episode here on Sports History Network. Now, speaking of sports history, this episode was brought to you by Firefly Books, and they have two great ones for you this summer. For basketball fans, they have the NBA 75, the definitive history by author Dave Zarum, who's appeared on our Jersey Dispatch podcast recently. He tells about the experience, the thrilling journey of the NBA, from its humble beginnings to its modern glory. Uncover the untold stories of triumph, controversy, and the greatest stars of the game. This isn't just a book. It's courtside seats to over 75 years of NBA history. And for the golf enthusiasts, swing into The Golf Round I'll Never Forget by Matt Adams. Relive 50 of golf's most memorable moments through the eyes of the legends themselves. From Garcia's triumph at the 2017 Masters to Nicklaus' miraculous 1986 comeback, it's the closest you'll get to walking the fairways with golf's greatest. Get your summer read on. Grab a copy of NBA 75 or The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, available online or at your favorite bookstore.
And we'd like to welcome everybody back to the Football's Family Podcast. I got a special guest, and would you like to introduce yourself and your book?
Sure. My name's Art Remillard. I am a dean at St. Francis University, as well as a professor of religious studies, and my book is called Bodies in Motion, A Religious History of Sports in America, and that's out with Oxford University Press in May of 2025, this year.
We'll have the notes in our the show notes so you can get a hold of the book. Tell me what brought this about. What brought this book about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So because this is a football podcast, I think that's where I'm going to start.
Well, please do.
Yeah. You can't see me here, but I'm, all of 5'5", 135 pounds, right? So it's not like I'm built to play football. But you can't grow up in central Pennsylvania and not be around it. And so for me, growing up, it was the Steelers, it was Penn State. And more Penn State than anything else. My dad went there, and it just became, again, kind of playing into the show, became part of the family conversation. My vivid memories of 1982 and 1986 when they won the national championship are things that stay with me. But I think one of the things that really kind of influenced why I wanted to write this book was a game that happened in 2009, I think it was, between Penn State and Iowa. Penn State at that point was undefeated. It looked like they might make it on to the whole BCS championship. And they went to Iowa, an okay Iowa team, and they lost on a last second field goal. And I just remember being absolutely infuriated at this game. Couldn't sleep. Woke up the next morning, and this is, in the days when I would get a newspaper in the morning, did not get a newspaper because I didn't want to see what the news, was saying about it, what those journalists were saying. And it was just so infuriating. And at some point, I kind of was able to catch myself and just be like, what is wrong with me? Why am I doing this? I'm a reasonably educated person. Shouldn't I be able to understand that the doings of a group of, 18 to 22-year-olds on a field of grass in, Iowa somewhere has no bearing on my life? So I start with that question, why do I care, right? And so I wanted to kind of look at that through history. What is it that has brought people to sports, and what are the things that are happening in sports that sort of ping off of religious sentiments, religious ideas, and religious institutions. Because sports and religion, a kind of conventional way of understanding that is that these are kind of two different things, right? And I understand that. And part of that is just we live in a society that likes to segment things. And our religious space is over here, and our sports space is over here. But what I've found is that people are not as predictable as that. That whenever they see something that they're really, really interested in and really, really focused on, those kinds of religious frames of references kind of come to it. And so, I thought about that, this idea of a fan, right? To be a sports fan, the root of that word, fanaticus, ties back to it, the kind of ancient uh, Greek or Roman practice, right, of the phantom. And it referred to the person who had this sort of unusual attachment to these sacred spaces. Um, so it's the way it gets translated is one who is possessed by a deity or one who's possessed by a local deity. So to kind of like circle it all around, it was like, boy, my reaction there, it was really uncharacteristic, right? But it's kind of what it means to be a fan. So I think that's what I wanted to do when I started to look at this topic.
It's a it's kind of an interesting way of looking at it, because even now, where it seems like religion is segmented, like you said,
Yeah,
how many where my daughter's cheerleader, in certain places where we go, they start with a prayer. There's always that idea of a religious, pray that somebody doesn't get hurt, that sort of stuff.
sure.
It's never too far away.
Hmm. Yep.
But even on sports days, and I've not read your book yet. That is on my list next to get to read, because when I saw that, it's like, man, that's awesome. That's kind of down my alley here. Can you give me some examples in history? And again, I'm ignorant on your book, so you can
Yeah.
change me or change the path I'm going if you want to. Can you give me some examples from your book about how religion and sports kind of interceded or intersect?
Sure. And I'll kind of stick with football, and I'll start with a something that I like to do around here. So I'm in central Pennsylvania. I'm in Steeler territory. I know what's happening with the Steelers, but I'm not going to call myself, necessarily a fan. And since you're in Tennessee, how about this? Let's go to 2008. There was a playoff game between Tennessee and Pittsburgh. Tennessee won, and after the game, some of the players.
Oh, okay. This hurts.
Yep.
This hurts. This hurts. I know the day you're talking about, the stepping on the terrible towel.
You got it. You got
Oh, yeah.
it. So they win the game. They stomp on the terrible towel. What happens? They lose the next game. They start the next season. They lose six straight, right?
Yep.
And this becomes known as the curse of the terrible towel.
Yep.
Um, and so, we have these kind of very direct ways in which religion kind of appears in the sports that we're playing. And you're mentioning some of them. But then there's these other things that just sort of linger in the subtext a little bit, right? And so around here, that yellow piece of cloth, which is just a yellow piece of cloth, isn't just a yellow piece of cloth, right? So when I start a class on religion and sports, I like to bring in my terrible towel and I just say, okay, what would happen if I brought this into any bar in the area, right? And I blew my nose on it and I threw it down on the ground and stomped on it, right? And the nervous chuckling starts and people start to get really, they're like, what? You're right. Because we recognize that as a sacred object. And this is something that I pay a lot of attention to. Like, where are the sacred matters of sports kind of shining through? When I talk about that, there's a sociologist by the name of Emil Durkheim that I really um, lean heavily on. And when we talked about sacred things, he was talking about those things that were, as he says, or that somebody paraphrased for him, those things that are deeply cherished and violently defended, right? And a terrible towel absolutely fits this thing, right? So if you kind of can go back, back in time a little bit with me, that emerged in the 1970s when the Steelers were kind of at their pinnacle. I think it was 1975, and there was a playoff game. And there's a very famous sportscaster here by the name of Myron Cope.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, there's this, we come up with this sort of gimmick idea, and he didn't know what to do with it. He's like, okay, fine, bring a yellow towel to the game. People bring their yellow towels, they swing it around, and then boom, it's a thing, right? And now, when newborn children are wrapped in them, people wave them at their weddings, at funerals. It is very common to see a terrible towel laid on the casket. These are deeply meaningful objects. I've lived halfway across the world. I've lived halfway across America. Everywhere I've lived, there's been a Steelers bar, and every Steelers bar is going to have a terrible towel, right? Um, and so these are the kinds of things I like to look at. What are these objects that we're saying, boy, this is important? I'll give you one more. What are these moments? Okay, again, in Pittsburgh, in our religious texts and our religious understanding, we always look for breaks in time, right? Right. What was the world like before? And then something happens, and then now we've got a whole new world. There's a whole big story around that in Christianity, is there not, right? Well, if you come to Pittsburgh, right, it's 1972, and it's the Immaculate Reception. The
Yeah.
religious language here is not accidental, right? It's Franco Harris. He scoops up this pass, and they win a playoff game. Now, this is the first time the Steelers ever won a playoff game. They were, an okay, not great team for most of their history. But this totally changed everything. Now, at the time, 1972, hey, it was a playoff game. Great, good, nice to see. But by the end of the 70s, for Super Bowls, all of the, championship city, all of that stuff, it becomes a break in time. People talk about, the city that the Immaculate Reception made. When you fly to Pittsburgh, if you ever have a chance to fly to Pittsburgh, okay, you're going to come into the Pittsburgh airport, and as you enter up to get your flight, you're going to pass by two statues. One's going to be George Washington, the other's going to be Franco Harris. And those two things
Yeah.
are right next to each other with no sense of irony, right?
See, that's the thing. I remember seeing videos. I think NFL uh, films did something about that particular statue, and he's reaching out to get the pass.
Yeah,
Um, we don't have that in Tennessee so much.
right.
And yeah, for the Titans, for Knoxville, it's different. They have a lot of things that I'm not familiar with. I didn't grow up a volunteer fan,
Oh,
but,
okay.
but Tennessee being relatively new, they don't have the history for it.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
don't have that, but I know in different parts of the country where you go Death Valley for the Clemson Tigers, and then Iowa. I believe it's Iowa where they turn the third quarter and they look at the children
Yep.
up in the children's hospital.
Yep.
And there's other things, even in Las Vegas where they have the torch for Al Davis, things like that. That actually kind of makes things a little bit more interesting.
Right. Right. It forms a sense of community, right? And I think that that's such an important thing. We live now in a time where we're worried about fragmentation, right? About kind of a loss of social cohesion, about the way in which um, we kind of stick with what we know, right? And we don't really interact with others. Sports kind of is still, fortunately resisting that, right? If you go to a Titans game, if you go to a Volunteers game, volunteers, you can have there's 100,000 people in there, right? Of all sorts of different backgrounds. And they have this kind of common identity, common sense of purpose, this fused together mentality. And there's something to that, right? That is really encouraging to see. It's great to see community. Um, but at the same time, it can have a tendency to let us look past the bad stuff. And that's kind of another sort of thread that I like to follow when I'm looking at this, right? What are the ways in which the elevation of heroes, which is one of the big themes of the book, can let us look past certain very evident things,
Well,
you
okay.
know?
All right, let's throw it out here. A couple examples.
Yeah,
The Olympics, back when they happened, back in pre AD time,
yeah,
was to honor the gods of the
yep,
Olympus.
yep,
Uh, that When I did a little study on that, I thought, well, this is actually pretty interesting. They had, each one would represent from a different city, which would represent their god from that city. That I
mhm,
thought that was pretty good, pretty
mhm,
cool. But even more recent, and I might be off on this, Art, and I bet you know what I'm talking about. After 9/11,
yeah.
didn't the Yankees make the World Series?
I- you know,
That's actually, let me see. me see that because I might be completely off on this.
I mean, I can remember very distinctly that the Yankees playing after 9/11 was a big deal. Um,
I might have been off on that. It was
it,
2000 was there was one of the championships, but actually it might have been they were playing. And I remember George Bush throwing out the first
yes.
pitch. And
Yep.
even when they even the Super Bowl after 9/11 where they had to make it, they had to move it up a week.
Hmm.
The reaction that people had from Bono and U2 when the names came down from the ceiling,
Yep.
it was amazing.
Yep. Absolutely. And I mean, that's certainly been a significant development, right? The infusion of all things related to national pride, right? Whenever it comes to football. In my in the scholarly work that I did before this, I looked a lot at the idea of civil religion, which it's a it refers to the ways in which a nation such as the United States that doesn't have an established church still has a common set of beliefs, symbols, and rituals, right? Things that it unites around. Um, and one of the things that I see a lot of is that kind of that question of national identity, of who we are, about what this community is, really filters a lot through sports. And in a way, it's kind of always done that, again, to kind of keep in the football um, territory. In the early part of the 20th century, college football, right? You had your guest on a little bit ago that was talking about the Galloping Ghost, Red Grange. College football was the game, right? In terms of football, pro football, not so much. And on top of that, right, it was very much a northern sport, right? And the South was sort of pretty far behind. Some of that has to do with the presence of an evangelical mentality that saw football as just being, you know, absolutely unacceptable. There were football programs that started in the South in the, late part of the when they started to appear in colleges and they got shut down because it offended evangelical sensibilities. But then they started to come back, especially after World War One. You can't have soldiers coming back from World War One and say, "Hey, a game like football is a little too too violent. We don't want you to play it." Um, but in 1920 and 1921, there was two really important games um, between Center College in Kentucky and Harvard. Harvard was you know, kind of the Alabama of the time, right? They were the unbeatable team. Center College was this sort of nobody even knew where it was, who these people were, right? Center goes up in 1920, gives them a real good game. They lose, but they were able to really put up a good game. 1921, Center comes back and they win. And this becomes, pretty big national story that you have a Southern team going up to the North and beating a Northern team, right? This was just a big deal. In Richmond, there was a newspaper headline that I found that said, "Center saves the South." Bo McMillan, who is the quarterback, is the new immortal, right? All the way of saying, right, college football has this history of being a way in which people mark regional identity. And North and South is one that has just played out so much throughout American history that, I mean, we still see today.
Well, and I can't remember the year, but it was in the 20s, I believe. Alabama, 20s or 30s. Alabama
Yep.
goes to Los Angeles, wins the game, and it wins the national championship. That the people there either had somebody listen to the radio and would give them signals, or they had a radio of their own that could actually pick it up, and that marked a really kind of a changing how people view the South in that particular case.
Absolutely. So that was 1926. That was the Rose Bowl with Alabama and Washington, and that
Yes.
has been called the game that changed the South, right? And it certainly is part of Alabama's origin story. What's kind of funny is that one of the things that I pay a lot of attention to is interpretation, and I'm really keen on understanding how the the way in which people interpret sports has a religious inflection, right? Sometimes, especially when they're really invested in it, right? So in the 1920s, you have the emergence of sports media. And in the South, Fuzzy Woodruff is kind of like the Grantland Rice of the South in a way, and when it comes to college football in particular. And he's sort of lukewarm on center. Center didn't belong to the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association, which was the kind of the governing body of Southern football. And then there were rumors that center had ringers. And so Fuzzy Woodruff was really down on center and didn't really think much of that game. The 26 Rose Bowl, he was all in, right? And so it's an interesting way in which our interpretation of events matters and all of the extraneous events, right? He just didn't have a good view of center. Center, I don't know if you've ever heard of Center College. I certainly didn't before I started doing this research, right? Most people don't know that. Most people do know Alabama, right? And so as time progresses, we look back on these things and we interpret them as being, enormously significant. And it is enormously significant at the time, but it became more so because Alabama became, the Crimson Tide in the following decades.
I have over there, oof, you
Yeah.
can't see it. I'll bring it. I have a picture of the Music City Miracle.
Okay.
Let me see. Let me get it for you. I'll show it to you.
Yeah.
And I had to have it when it came up for sale, and you can't see it because it's kind of, but you see Kevin Dyson's on there, and he had received the pass from the it was a reverse lateral. It was not a forward pass. Frank Wycheck did not throw it forward, and he's running down. 16 seconds left, and he's running down the side,
Hmm.
and Mike Keith is saying that you basically do you believe in miracles like they did on like they did during the what was that, the Olympics
Yeah.
hockey
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
1980.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The
And
Miracle on Ice.
yeah, and that's what he was saying. And when my son was younger, the Titans had a kids program where you can go and see the field. And my son didn't care about football, but I signed him up so I can go run on the field. And I ran that same route.
Yeah.
And people were looking at me like the kids were looking at me like that guy's weird. And the dads were like, way to go.
I get it.
Because it becomes, and that stadium's going to be gone in about a
Yeah.
year and a half, something like that. But it becomes a place where that is what I remember from the 1999 season.
Mm.
I remember that one moment because I can say that that one moment made me a Titans fan.
Yeah.
I was a Broncos fan because that's all, I followed them from 1987 on. But when the Titans came, I wasn't really big into them. And then when that happened, I'm like, you know what? We finally got a team
Yeah.
and follow them. And in fact, I just got a couple of gifts where people just keep putting Titan stuff in my lap for some reason. I can't handle it, I guess. But when you're talking about things that make a meaningful existence there, meaningful,
Right.
just something meaningful to you, that's what did it for me with the Titans.
Yeah.
And it's been a sickness ever since then.
Yeah. And it's, I think that's the recurring thing about sports, right? Is that we attach ourselves to these things, not because they have any kind of material, lasting, pragmatic value, but because we love them. There's just something deep inside there that really connects and allows us to experience something bigger than ourselves.
Well, okay, you said you grew up a Penn State fan,
Right.
Pittsburgh fan, but more Penn State because of your dad.
Yeah.
That's the whole goal of this show, Art,
Yeah.
where I've had people come on, and what I love about it, you wrote a book.
Yeah.
That's awesome, and I respect that. I really do. But I had people on there who were just regular old people that wanted to talk about their game. And that's what this show is. We
Yeah.
get people, authors, whatever, but we get, normal people who don't write books too. And I've had people come on and say, well, I was a fan because of my dad or my uncle took me to a game and then
Yep.
explained things to me. And it may not mean anything to anybody else, but for you being a Penn State fan, I bet you
Mhm.
if I say some names like Kajana Carter and Kerry Collins, you know who they
Yep.
are.
All right. Yep.
Um, but LeVar Arrington,
Oh yeah.
yeah, which was probably one of the best defensive players I've ever saw.
Oh,
And Kajana Carter would have been great too if it wasn't for injuries.
yeah.
And I actually own a Kerry Collins jersey because he played for the Titans.
That's right.
He
Yeah.
did. It was and it was one of the blue ones. It was the Love You Blue ones. Oh, it's beautiful. Too
Hmm.
bad mice got in it, and tore them up. But it was a pretty jersey. But when I say those things, or if I say, like you were telling me, the years they won the national championship, those mean things to you.
Yep.
For somebody else, they may not mean anything. Because if
Yeah.
you told me the 4 years that the Steelers won the Super Bowl, I know those years because I've studied and read about them, but they don't mean
Yeah.
that much to me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I one of the articles that I wrote that I reference in here, um, I tell the story of Terry O'Neill. And so I think it was was it 2006, I think. Um, I want to make sure I got that right. Um, it was, yeah, 2006. It was a playoff game against the Indianapolis Colts. And so I just remember hearing about this story, but Terry O'Neill, the story was he was at a bar and he was watching the game, and it really looked like the Steelers had this wrapped up. But then the Colts come back, and then finally it's getting near the end. Pittsburgh's on the goal line. They're ready to score, put this thing away. It's going to be done. Roethlisberger hands off to Bettis. Bettis, who hadn't had a single fumble all season, coughed the ball up. It
Yep.
gets recovered. It gets run back. Ben Roethlisberger saves it with a shoestring tackle. There's a great defensive stand, right? And the Steelers win. Meanwhile, Terry O'Neill's watching this, and the moment at which the fumble happens, he has a heart attack. His friends think he's joking, but then he starts turning blue. There were some EMTs there and they got him, he was okay. They got him to the hospital. But here's the part that I just love. When he finally recovered and he came back to conscious, his first three words, did we win?
He's got his
Right?
priorities.
And it hits at so many different levels, right? That's where his priorities are. But he used the word we.
Ah,
And I can remember it was after the 86 game, which, when Penn State beat Miami with an interception at the very end, Pete Giftopoulos, that guy's never going to buy a drink for himself in State College ever again, right? My dad came in and he says, we won. And I was like, wow, we did. Like this sense, I didn't go to Penn State, right? Like my dad did. But the way in which we as individuals fuse ourselves to this collective we, right? Terry O'Neill was not a member of the Steelers. I'm not a member of Penn State. You're not a member of the Titans. But like, we love to have that feeling of being part of something bigger than us,
all right.
right? Yeah.
Let's tighten. The Volunteers won in '98. They beat
Mhm.
Florida State.
Mhm.
This is '98. This is 20, over 20 years ago. Guess how many people are still riding around with that license
Oh, yeah.
plate with that?
Oh, yeah. 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 I did my graduate work at Florida State. And it was the coolest. I mean, all their national championship, it's up there. You've got the statues of Bobby Bowden, right? Like all that stuff. And those things are absolutely same thing. Their championship years are emblazoned. Um, on game day, I always love this. So games are on Saturday. You'd start to see the RVs come in on Thursday. And then there was the one RV that was known as the $1 million RV, right? That was decked out in all of the garnet and gold and all that stuff, right? This this consumes a lot of people's attention about what matters to them and what they're really invested in.
And I'll say this, and I do appreciate you coming on, Art. You're very enthusiastic, very good guest. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
I didn't have that type of raising. We didn't have an NFL team here till '97.
Mhm.
And I was a Vanderbilt Commodore fan for a long time, and we didn't win ever.
Mhm.
Except I did have to get my day off on the 2008 when they went to the Music City Bowl, and that was the
Mhm.
coldest game I've ever been to. But I saw Vanderbilt win a bowl game.
Mhm.
It's just neat how, like, up in my office right now, there's a lot of two-tone blue. There's a lot of it.
Mhm.
And there would be a lot more if I had more room. But over in the corner here, I have two autographs
Mhm.
on a TV guide. I had to buy it. Steve McNair and Eddie George.
Okay.
So Friday, Friday or Saturday, I don't remember which one it was. I took my youngest daughter up to Nashville and we drove by the old Titan Stadium.
Mhm.
The new one's being built right behind it. And she looks up on the board. They have like these giant banners, and she said, "Who's number 9?"
Mhm.
And I wanted to stop the car, pull over, and give her a good lecture on Steve McNair. And it hurt me that I didn't explain to her who number 9 was.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like you see Steve McNair nearly won us a Super Bowl. I have Eddie George's autograph on a jersey over here. He was the face, him and Frank Rychek and Javon Curse and Bruce Matthews and all these guys. So yeah, while we may not have the type of history that Penn State does, we have something. So
Mhm.
that, you value things, you look at things, you can mark things. Football is a religion, sports is a religion of sorts. I use that loosely, but your book kind of emphasizes that, doesn't it?
Yeah, doesn't it? So it's funny. I start off with an op-ed that a friend and I wrote in the Washington Post some years back, and that was kind of the headline of it. And I generally pause at saying a religion, right? Because to me, because that's a common kind of refrain, I think, is that sports is, football is, baseball is a religion. And I understand what that sentiment is trying to say. I think to me, uh, it's more helpful for me to say, what are the ways that we kind of use these religious insights to understand what we're doing? Let me give you an example. A friend of mine likes to tell the story of being at this religion conference, scholars like myself, and he's watching in between the sessions. There's a group of professors over there watching Boston College playing Notre Dame, and it's coming down to the very end. And he's watching all of these scholars on their knees, waiting for the outcome of this, right? Praying, right? From these two Catholic schools. And the way he framed it, he says, I don't think that they were, praying to the gods of football or anything like that. I think that what they were doing is they were saying, this is really important to me, and this is how I know how to show what's important to me, right? And so I think for me, as I've seen kind of sports evolve over time, the way in which we talk about sports heroes, the way in which we talk about these great moments, about these sacred places, it's not necessarily that people are saying, I think, this is my religion, right? With all of the kind of understandings that might carry. It's this is important to me. This is how I kind of make sense of life and connect to something bigger than myself. And so that's kind of my framing that I like to approach this with.
I can't wait to read it. Where can we get your book?
So you can get it on Amazon. That's the easiest place to get it. And the Oxford University Press website also has it. So those are two really good places, or pretty much any place where you buy online books.
Thank you, Art, for coming on.
You are most welcome. It was great talking with you.
And y'all, thank you for listening to the Football's Family Podcast.
All right.
The Sports History Network, where legends live on and the past plays loud. Welcome to the place where history's proud. From gridiron glory to the hardwood stars, from the racetrack heat to Olympic bars. It's the voices, the stories, the moments you miss, told by fans and pros who live for this. Hook and Themic, the Sports History Network, where the past comes alive. Podcasts and blogs that keep the flame high. From Babe to Brady, Alley to the Dome. If it's history and sports, then this is the home. SportsHistoryNetwork.com, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.